Hello everyone, welcome to the Mysterious Stories channel, where you'll discover the most mysterious, scary, and fascinating stories. Make sure to turn up the volume and get ready for a spine-chilling experience you won't forget.
The forest was alive with the sounds of night. Crickets chirped in an endless symphony, and the rustle of leaves whispered secrets to the wind. For a group of 5 friends, Liam, Sophia, Eric, Maya, and Rachel, this camping trip was meant to be a weekend escape from the monotony of city life. The woods stretched endlessly around them, a labyrinth of towering trees and shadowy paths. It felt peaceful at first, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, an unease began to settle over the group. Their campfire crackled, casting flickering light that danced across their faces. Liam, the self-appointed leader, poked at the embers with a stick. "All right, who's got a scary story?" he asked, his grin betraying his excitement. "Not me," Rachel said quickly, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I've heard enough horror stories about forests to last a lifetime." "Oh, come on," Eric teased. "What's the worst that could happen?" "It's just trees and animals." Maya shot him a skeptical look. "You're saying that now, but wait until you hear something rustling in the bushes at midnight." Sophia laughed nervously. "Let's just hope it's a raccoon and not something worse." The group chuckled, but their laughter fell thin against the weight of the darkened forest. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Liam noticed something odd. The forest seemed quieter now, the usual hum of insects and distant hoots of owls conspicuously absent. He didn't mention it, chalking it up to his imagination. As the night wore on, the group began to disperse to their tents. Liam stayed by the fire, adding a few more logs and staring into the flames. He was just beginning to doze off when he heard it, a faint whisper, like someone calling his name. "Liam." He sat bolt upright, his heart pounding. "Hello," he called out, his voice wavering. The forest answered with silence. He glanced toward the tents, where his friends were fast asleep. Shaking his head, he muttered, "Must have been the wind." But as he turned back to the fire, he felt it, the undeniable sensation of being watched. The hairs on his neck stood on end, and a chill crept down his spine. Slowly, he scanned the tree line, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam revealed nothing but endless trees, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the sky. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Liam." He jumped to his feet, backing away from the fire. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. Still, there was no response, just the oppressive silence and the suffocating darkness pressing in around him. The sound of footsteps crunching on leaves broke the stillness. They were slow, deliberate, and coming from just beyond the light of the fire. Liam's breath caught in his throat as he swung the flashlight toward the source. The beam wavered, illuminating only empty forest. "Guys," he shouted, panic rising in his chest. He stumbled toward the tents, shaking each one. "Wake up, something's out there." One by one, his friends emerged, groggy and irritated. "What are you yelling about?" Eric asked, rubbing his eyes. "I heard something," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone was whispering my name." Rachel frowned. "Are you sure?" "It's probably just your imagination." "It wasn't my imagination," Liam insisted. "There were footsteps. Something's out there." Sophia looked toward the tree line, her expression uneasy. "Maybe we should check it out, just to be safe." "Are you crazy?" Maya hissed. "If something's out there, the last thing we should do is go looking for it." Eric grabbed a flashlight and shrugged. "I'll take a look, probably just an animal." "I'm coming with you," Liam said, his fear tempered by the need for answers. The two ventured into the woods, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees pressing tighter with each step. The air grew colder, and the silence was deafening. Then, they heard it, a soft rustling, like something moving just out of sight. "Do you see anything?" Liam whispered. Eric shook his head. "No, but..." He stopped mid-sentence, his flashlight frozen on a figure standing between the trees. It was tall, impossibly thin, and shrouded in shadow. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light like a predator in the night. "Run," Eric whispered. Neither of them needed to be told twice. They bolted back toward the campsite, their breaths ragged and hearts pounding. Behind them, the sound of branches snapping and leaves crunching grew louder, as if something was giving chase. When they burst into the clearing, the others were already gathered by the fire, their faces pale with fear. "What happened?" Maya demanded. "Something's out there," Liam gasped. "We need to leave, now." Before anyone could respond, the whisper came again, louder and more insistent. "Liam." The fire flickered violently, and the shadows around them seemed to come alive. The group huddled together, their fear palpable as they realized the truth. They were not alone in these woods. The group's panic was palpable as they stood clustered around the dwindling campfire. The darkness beyond the flickering flames seemed alive, shifting and undulating as if it had a will of its own. Liam, still clutching the flashlight, turned to the others. "We need to move. We can't stay here." "And go where?" Rachel snapped, her voice sharp with fear. "We'll just get lost. The woods are endless at night." "Staying here isn't an option," Eric said, his voice firm but trembling. "Whatever that thing was, it's out there, waiting." "We should head back the way we came," Sophia suggested. "If we stick together, we can find the trail." Maya shook her head. "What if it's blocking the way? What if it's leading us into a trap?" The group fell silent, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Then, without warning, the whisper came again, weaving through the air like a ghostly thread. "Liam." The fire sputtered, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The group recoiled as the shadows around them seemed to lurch closer. Liam's grip tightened on the flashlight. "We can't wait for it to come to us," he said. "We're leaving, now." They packed quickly, fumbling with tents and supplies as their nerves frayed. The forest pressed in on them, the once familiar sounds of night replaced by an oppressive, unnatural silence. As they set off, the beam of Liam's flashlight carved a narrow path through the darkness. Sophia and Eric carried lanterns, their faint light barely pushing back the shadows. The group trudged forward, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. Every step felt heavier, the darkness around them seeming to deepen. Rachel broke the silence. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Maya glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wide. "We've been watched since we got here. You saw it, didn't you?" "I saw its eyes," Eric admitted, his voice low. "It was like they were glowing, like it could see straight through us." "Stop," Liam hissed, holding up his hand. The group froze, their breath hitching. The trees around them were silent, but something felt wrong. Then they saw it, a faint glimmer in the darkness, eyes. Dozens of them, surrounding the group in a loose circle. The lights from their lanterns reflected off the orbs, revealing their unnatural shine. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. "What is that?" Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Liam replied, his voice tight with fear. "But we're not stopping to find out. Keep moving. Stay close." As they pressed on, the eyes followed, shifting silently through the trees. Every so often, one would vanish, only to reappear closer than before. The whispers grew louder, intertwining with the rustle of leaves and the snapping of branches underfoot. They weren't calling Liam's name anymore. Instead, they formed a chorus of fragmented words. "Stay lost forever." The group's pace quickened, their breaths coming in short, panic bursts. Eric stumbled over a root, nearly dropping his lantern. Sophia grabbed his arm, pulling him upright. "Don't stop," she urged, her voice shaking. "We're almost there." "Almost where?" Maya snapped. "We don't even know where we're going." Liam stopped abruptly, holding up his hand. "Listen." The group fell silent, straining their ears. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl. It was close, impossibly close. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was tall and twisted, its limbs unnaturally long and ending in claw-like fingers. Its face was obscured by darkness, but the glow of its eyes was unmistakable. The creature tilted its head, studying them with an almost curious intensity. "Run," Liam whispered. The group bolted, their fear overriding any sense of direction. They tore through the forest, branches slashing at their arms and legs. The growl followed them, accompanied by the sound of heavy, pounding footsteps. The creature was chasing them. Sophia screamed as her lantern slipped from her grasp and shattered on the ground, plunging her into darkness. Liam grabbed her hand, pulling her along. "Don't stop," he shouted. Ahead, a faint light appeared, cutting through the oppressive darkness. It was a clearing, bathed in the silver glow of the moon. The group burst into the open, their breaths ragged and bodies trembling. The creature stopped at the edge of the trees, its glowing eyes watching them with an almost predatory patience. Then, slowly, it retreated into the shadows, disappearing as if it had never been there. The group collapsed to the ground, their relief short-lived as they realized the clearing was unfamiliar. They had no idea where they were or how far they had run from their campsite. The whispers began again, soft and mocking, weaving through the trees that encircled them. "Stay with us forever." The clearing felt like a sanctuary at first, the moonlight offering a reprieve from the oppressive darkness of the woods. But as the group's breaths slowed and their fear began to ebb, a new dread took hold. The clearing was too quiet, too still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "Where are we?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "This doesn't look like anywhere we've been before." Liam scanned the tree line, his flashlight casting long, shifting shadows. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we can't stay here. That thing, it's still out there." "And if it comes back?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we keep running," Eric said, though the exhaustion in his tone betrayed his words. "But we need to figure out which direction to go." Maya turned in a slow circle, her eyes wide. "Do you notice something?" she asked. "The trees." They all looked the same. The group followed her gaze, realization dawning on them. Each tree was identical, their trunks gnarled and twisted in the same way. It was as if they were standing in a replica of the forest they had just fled through. "No," Rachel whispered, backing away. "This isn't possible. This isn't real." "Calm down," Liam said, though his voice lacked conviction. He turned to Eric. "We need to mark our path. If we're going to find a way out, we can't keep running in circles." Eric nodded, pulling a pocket knife from his backpack. He approached the nearest tree and carved a deep X into the bark. The sound of the blade cutting through wood echoed unnaturally, as if the forest were protesting. "All right," Eric said, stepping back, "let's move." The group set off again, sticking close together. The whispers followed them, growing louder with each step. The words were clearer now, fragments of sentences that made no sense. "The circle never ends. You belong to us." As they walked, Liam kept his flashlight trained ahead, his nerves on edge. After what felt like an eternity, they stopped to catch their breath. Eric glanced at a nearby tree and froze. The X he had carved was there, fresh and unmistakable. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "That's impossible. We've been walking straight." "We're going in circles," Sophia said, her voice cracking. "We'll never get out of here." Liam clenched his fists, trying to suppress his growing panic. "There has to be a way. We just need to keep moving." But as they turned to leave, the forest seemed to shift. The trees stretched taller, their branches intertwining to form a dense canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The darkness deepened, and the whispers became a cacophony, surrounding them on all sides. "It's coming," Maya said, her voice barely audible over the noise. "It's here." The growl came again, low and menacing. The creature stepped into view, its glowing eyes locking onto the group. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring their fear. The air grew cold, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to ripple. "Run," Liam shouted, grabbing Rachel's hand and pulling her forward. The group scattered, their paths diverging as they fled in blind terror. The creature's footsteps thundered behind them, relentless and unyielding. Liam and Rachel sprinted through the trees, their lungs burning and legs trembling. They burst into another clearing, this one bathed in an eerie, pale light. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, its surface etched with strange, indecipherable symbols. "What is this?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Liam replied, his eyes scanning the symbols, "but it might be our only chance." The others emerged from the trees, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. The creature was close, its growls reverberating through the forest. Liam stepped toward the altar, his mind racing. "Help us," he shouted, though he wasn't sure who or what he was addressing. "We just want to leave." The symbols began to glow, pulsating with a faint, golden light. The whispers grew louder, but this time, they seemed to converge into a single voice. The price must be paid. What price? Sophia asked, her voice cracking. Before anyone could respond, the creature burst into the clearing, its form more terrifying than ever. The group huddled together as the light from the altar intensified, forcing the creature to halt. It snarled, its glowing eyes narrowing. One must stay, the voice intoned. One must join the forest. The group stared at one another, the weight of the words sinking in. No, Rachel said, shaking her head. There has to be another way. There isn't, Liam said, his voice heavy with resignation. He stepped forward, his eyes meeting the creature's. If it means the rest of you can leave, I'll stay. Liam, no, Maya cried, grabbing his arm. There's no time, Liam said, gently pulling away. Go, live, get out of here. The altar's light engulfed him, and the creature let out a deafening roar. The forest seemed to shudder as the group was enveloped in blinding light. When the light faded, they found themselves standing at the edge of the forest, the road back to their town stretching before them. But Liam was gone. The abandoned house at the end of Hawthorne Lane had always been the subject of whispered tales. Children dared each other to touch its rusted gate, teenagers swapped stories about its haunted past, and even adults avoided its shadow after dark. For years, it stood empty, its windows like hollow eyes, its peeling paint and sagging roof a testament to decades of neglect. Emily had never believed in ghosts. As a freelance journalist, she prided herself on chasing real stories, not superstitions. But when she stumbled upon an old diary at a thrift store, a diary with entries detailing strange happenings at the Hawthorne house, curiosity got the better of her. She decided to investigate, hoping to uncover the truth behind the rumors. The house loomed before her in the twilight, its silhouette jagged against the fading sun. The air seemed colder here, the silence oppressive. Emily hesitated at the gate, her fingers brushing the rusted metal. A chill ran down her spine, but she pushed the feeling aside and stepped through. Inside, the house was as decrepit as she expected. Dust coated every surface, cobwebs draped from the ceiling, and the wooden floor groaned beneath her feet. She clicked on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The air smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. She wandered through the rooms, taking notes and snapping photos. The living room had an old fireplace, its mantel adorned with cracked porcelain figurines. The kitchen was empty save for a single chair in the center, its legs uneven. As she climbed the stairs, each step creaked ominously, as if protesting her intrusion. It wasn't until she reached the second floor that she heard a faint whisper. Emily froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. It came from the walls themselves, a chorus of voices layered atop one another. Leave, they murmured. This is not your place. Emily's rational mind tried to dismiss it as the wind or the house settling. But as she moved closer to the wall, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. She placed a hand against the peeling wallpaper, feeling a strange vibration beneath her fingertips. Who's there? She asked, her voice shaking. The whispers paused, replaced by a deep, resonant silence. Then one voice emerged from the others, clear and direct. You shouldn't have come here, it said, the tone almost sorrowful. Emily yanked her hand back, her heart racing. She stumbled away from the wall, her flashlight beam darting wildly across the room. The voice followed her, the words now echoing in her mind as much as in her ears. They never leave, it said. They always stay. Who are you? She demanded, backing toward the door. The reply came not in words, but in images that flashed through her mind. A family gathered around the fireplace, their faces pale and strained. A woman sobbing in the kitchen, clutching a letter. A child standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at something unseen. Each scene was tinged with a suffocating dread, as if the house itself had absorbed their despair. Emily's breath came in short gasps as she fled down the stairs. The whispers followed her, growing louder, more urgent. Stay and listen, they pleaded. You must know the truth. She reached the front door, her hands fumbling with the latch. It wouldn't budge. Panic surged as she yanked and pulled, but the door remained firmly shut. The whispers swirled around her, now a cacophony of voices all speaking at once. "The walls remember," they said. "We remember." Suddenly, the house seemed to shift, the walls bending inward, the floor vibrating beneath her feet. Emily screamed, her flashlight dropping to the ground and rolling away. In the beam's faint glow, she saw the wallpaper peel back, revealing layers of writing beneath names, dates, and words scrawled in desperation. "Help me. They took everything. It's watching." And then, just as abruptly as it began, the house stilled, the whispers faded to silence. Emily stood there, trembling, her back pressed against the unyielding door. She retrieved her flashlight and turned back to the writing on the walls. One phrase stood out among the others, written larger and deeper, as if carved into the very wood. "Truth comes at a price." Emily's journalistic instincts warred with her primal fear. She knew she couldn't leave, not yet. Whatever secrets this house held, they were begging to be uncovered. But as she turned back toward the stairs, the whispers returned, softer this time, but filled with a chilling certainty. "The walls have seen. The walls will tell." Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as she climbed the stairs once more. Her flashlight's beam danced across the faded wallpaper, illuminating more scrawled messages hidden beneath layers of neglect. Each word felt like a cry for help, echoing the house's sinister energy. She gripped her notebook tightly, determined to uncover the truth. The second floor was eerily quiet. The faint whispers from earlier seemed to have retreated, as if biding their time. Emily stepped cautiously into what appeared to be a child's bedroom. The room was small, with a single bed pushed against the wall and a wooden rocking horse in the corner. A layer of dust coated everything, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. She approached the rocking horse, noting how its paint had faded to reveal the bare wood beneath. Her fingers traced the carved initials on its side. A faint chill passed through her as the rocking horse creaked, moving slightly as if nudged by an invisible hand. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. The room remained still, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Emily's gaze shifted to the closet door. It was slightly ajar, revealing darkness within. Summoning her courage, she stepped forward and pulled the door open. Inside, she found a stack of old, yellowed papers tied together with a frayed ribbon. The top page bore the same initials as the rocking horse, M.H. She untied the ribbon and carefully unfolded the papers. They appeared to be letters, written in a delicate, looping script. The first letter read, "My dearest Margaret, the house is not what we thought. It whispers to me at night, filling my dreams with dread. I fear it knows our secrets, and it will not let us go. If you find this, know that I tried to protect you." The letter ended abruptly, the ink smeared as if the writer's hand had trembled. Emily's heart raced as she flipped through the other letters, each one more desperate than the last. They spoke of shadows that moved without light, of voices that spoke in riddles, and of an overwhelming sense of being trapped. A sudden thud from the hallway made Emily jump, dropping the letters. She spun around, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The sound had come from the end of the hall, where a door she hadn't noticed before now stood slightly open. She hesitated, every instinct telling her to leave, but the journalist in her pushed forward. She approached the door, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. The whispers returned, faint but insistent, urging her onward. The room beyond the door was unlike the others. It was bare, with walls that seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. In the center of the room stood a single object, a large, ornate mirror. Its frame was intricately carved with symbols Emily didn't recognize, and the glass was so polished that it reflected her face with unsettling clarity. As she stepped closer, the whispers grew louder, forming words she could almost understand. Her reflection in the mirror began to shift, her features blurring and changing. She watched in horror as the image transformed into a woman she didn't recognize, her face twisted in anguish. "Help us," the woman in the mirror mouthed, her voice overlapping with the whispers. Emily reached out, her fingers brushing the cold glass. The moment she made contact, a jolt of energy shot through her, and the room seemed to collapse around her. The walls darkened, the air grew heavy, and the whispers turned into anguished screams. She stumbled back, breaking her connection with the mirror. The room returned to its previous state, the screams fading into silence. Emily's chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath. She turned to leave, but the door had vanished, replaced by a solid wall. Panic surged as she pounded on the wall, but it didn't budge. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and the woman's face reappeared. "The truth lies beneath," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "Find the key, and you will understand." Emily's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows across the room. Her gaze fell to the floor, where she noticed something she hadn't before, a small trapdoor, its edges barely visible. She dropped to her knees and pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into darkness. As the whispers urged her downward, Emily knew she was delving deeper into the house's secrets and perhaps into something she might never escape. Emily descended the narrow staircase into the darkness below, her flashlight flickering, as if struggling against the weight of the air. The walls around her were rough, damp, and pulsating faintly, as though the house itself was alive and breathing. Each step she took echoed into the void, amplifying the oppressive silence. The staircase ended abruptly, opening into a cavernous basement. The room was vast, much larger than the house above, and lit by an eerie, unnatural glow emanating from the walls. Strange symbols, similar to those carved into the mirror's frame, were etched into the stone, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic light. At the center of the room stood an altar, and on it lay an old, leather-bound book. Emily approached the altar, her footsteps hesitant. The whispers surrounded her now, louder and more distinct, yet still incomprehensible. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and opened the book. Its pages were filled with writing in a language she didn't recognize, but the diagrams and sketches sent shivers down her spine. Depictions of shadowy figures, spirals of screaming faces, and what appeared to be rituals. As she flipped through the pages, the whispers shifted, forming coherent words. "The house is a gate, the gate is the key, the truth lies within." Suddenly, a low rumble shook the room. Emily staggered back as the walls began to shift, the symbols glowing brighter. The air grew colder, and a figure began to emerge from the shadows, a tall, indistinct form that seemed to absorb the light around it. "You have come far," the figure said, its voice a mixture of many, layered atop one another. "But the price of truth is steep." Emily's heart pounded as she found her voice. "What is this place? What happened here?" The figure extended a shadowy arm toward the book. "This house is more than wood and stone. It is a vessel, a conduit for memories and pain. Those who have suffered here remain, bound by their anguish, their secrets feeding the walls." Images flooded Emily's mind, the family she had seen in her visions, their lives unraveling in despair. The woman clutching the letter, tears streaming down her face. The child on the stairs, staring into the darkness. Each moment was tinged with a sense of inescapable dread. "Why me?" Emily whispered. "Why did the house call me here?" "You seek the truth," the figure replied, "and the truth seeks you. But knowing it will bind you to this place, as it has bound so many before." Emily's mind raced. She had come here to uncover the house's secrets, but the weight of those secrets threatened to consume her. She looked down at the book, its pages glowing faintly now, and realized she had a choice: leave and abandon the mystery, or stay and uncover the full extent of the house's darkness. "What happens if I stay?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure's form seemed to ripple, its edges fraying. "You will see what the walls have seen. You will know what the walls know, but you will never leave." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She thought of the diary that had brought her here, the letters she had found, and the voices that had pleaded for her help. Could she turn her back on them now? Could she leave, knowing she'd never find peace without answers? Summoning every ounce of courage, she stepped toward the book. "I'm not leaving until I know the truth." The figure's voice softened, almost sorrowful. "Then the truth you shall have." As Emily placed her hands on the book, the room erupted in light. The whispers became deafening, transforming into a single, unified voice. The walls around her dissolved, and she found herself standing in a void, surrounded by the memories of the house. She saw everything: the joy, the pain, the betrayals, and the tragedies that had unfolded within these walls. And then, she saw herself. Her own image stared back at her, frozen in time, as if she had always been a part of the house's story. When the light faded, Emily was back in the basement, The book was gone, the altar empty. The whispers had ceased, replaced by an all-encompassing silence. She turned to leave, climbing the stairs with a heavy heart. This time, the door opened without resistance, and she stepped out into the night. The house stood silent behind her, its secrets now a part of her. As she walked away, she realized the whispers had followed her, faint but persistent. They were no longer confined to the walls. They were within her, and she knew they always would be. The clock ticked steadily, each sound echoing in the hollow silence of the room. Madison stood by the edge of her bed, staring at the dimly lit corner that had become her nightly fixation. The air in the room seemed heavier there, as though that small space carried a weight beyond comprehension. She swallowed hard and climbed into bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Madison's new apartment was nothing spectacular, just a modest space on the third floor of an aging building. It was affordable, and it had everything she needed. But ever since she moved in, that corner had caught her attention. It wasn't always noticeable. During the day, it seemed like just another part of the room. But at night, when she turned off the lights and let the soft glow of her bedside lamp take over, the corner seemed darker, as if the shadows there were denser, pulsating with an unsettling presence. At first, Madison dismissed it as her imagination. It was easy to blame fatigue or the trickery of low lighting, but then the whispers began. Faint at first, they were no louder than a breeze brushing against the leaves. Words she couldn't understand, murmuring in a cadence that sent chills down her spine. Every time she tried to listen closely, they would stop, leaving her questioning her sanity. Tonight was no different. She lay there, her heart thudding in her chest as she stared at the corner. It was almost hypnotic, the way the shadows seemed to ripple like waves on a dark sea. And then she heard it again, Madison. Her breath hitched. The voice was clearer this time, unmistakable. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a deliberate call. A chill swept through her body, and she clutched the blanket tighter, her knuckles white with fear. "Who's there?" she managed to croak, her voice trembling. The corner remained silent, but the oppressive weight of its presence only grew stronger. Madison's eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that could explain what was happening. Her gaze landed on her phone on the bedside table. Slowly, she reached for it, her hand trembling. As her fingers brushed the device, the lamp flickered. For a moment, the room plunged into darkness, and in that brief second, she thought she saw it. A figure, tall, gaunt, and faceless, standing in the corner where the shadows had been. The light returned, and the corner was empty again, but Madison's heart was racing. She scrambled for her phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming it at the corner. There was nothing there, just the wall, bare and unremarkable. "Get it together, Madison," she muttered, her voice shaky. But as she lowered the flashlight, she noticed something on the wall. Faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. Scratch marks, long and uneven, as if someone or something had been clawing at the surface. A sharp knock on her bedroom door made her scream. She spun around, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. "Madison, are you okay?" Came a voice from the other side. It was her neighbor, Daniel. Relief flooded her, and she stumbled toward the door, unlocking it with trembling hands. Daniel's concerned face appeared, his brows furrowed. "I heard you scream. Is everything all right?" Madison hesitated. How could she explain what just happened without sounding crazy? I thought I saw something," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel glanced over her shoulder into the room. "You've been hearing things too, haven't you?" Her blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This building, it has a history. You're not the first tenant to notice things." Madison's stomach churned. What kind of history? Daniel's eyes darted toward the corner behind her, and his expression darkened. "Not here. I'll tell you tomorrow. Just don't stay up too late. And whatever you do, don't stare at it for too long." Before she could ask him to explain, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway. She closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. She glanced back at the corner, now bathed in the harsh beam of her flashlight. For a moment, everything was silent. But then, just as she was about to turn away, She heard it again. Madison. The morning light seeped through the curtains, but Madison barely noticed. She hadn't slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, had kept her on edge. The corner seemed harmless now, bathed in daylight, but the memory of the previous night lingered like a shadow in her mind. She glanced at her phone. It was 8:15 a.m. Daniel had promised to explain more today. She debated whether to go knock on his door or wait for him to come to her. Finally, unable to sit still, she grabbed her jacket and stepped into the hallway. Daniel's apartment was just 2 doors down. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the door. Before she could knock, the door creaked open, and Daniel stood there, looking like he hadn't slept much either. "I figured you'd come," he said, his voice low. "Come in." Madison stepped inside, and immediately she felt the difference. Daniel's apartment was cluttered but warm, filled with books and strange artifacts. The air smelled faintly of incense, a stark contrast to the cold, empty feel of her own space. He motioned for her to sit at a small table near the window. "You said you saw something last night," he began, sitting across from her. "Tell me everything." Madison recounted the events, her voice trembling as she described the whispers, the flickering light, and the figure in the corner. Daniel listened intently, his expression growing darker with every word. When she finished, he leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I was afraid of this," he said finally. "You're not imagining it, Madison. There's something in this building, something that's been here long before we were." Madison's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" Daniel stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a worn leather journal. He set it on the table and opened it to a page filled with sketches and notes. This building was constructed in the early 1900s. Before that, the land belonged to a family with a dark history. People have reported strange occurrences here for decades. Whispers, shadows, scratches on the walls. It always starts small, but it gets worse. Madison's heart pounded. Worse how? Daniel hesitated, then pointed to a sketch of a faceless figure, eerily similar to what she thought she'd seen. "They say it feeds on fear. The more you notice it, the stronger it gets. And once it manifests fully," he trailed off, his expression grim. "What happens?" She pressed ... "No one knows for sure," he admitted. "The people who've seen it, they disappear." Madison felt a chill run down her spine. Why hasn't anyone done anything, moved out, torn the building down? Daniel sighed. "Some have tried, but it always follows. And the building, it's like it won't let itself be destroyed." She sat back, her mind reeling. "So what do I do?" Daniel looked at her, his eyes serious. "For now, don't let it know you're afraid. Act normal. And whatever you do, don't let it think it's winning." Madison's hands trembled as she picked up the journal, flipping through the pages. The sketches, the accounts, it was all too much. But one thing was clear, she couldn't ignore it any longer. The shadow in the corner was real, and it wasn't going away. That night, Madison sat in her living room, the journal spread out on the coffee table in front of her. The pages were filled with fragmented stories from tenants who had come and gone, each recounting eerie similarities, whispers, dark figures, and the feeling of being watched. Some entries ended abruptly, the last words trailing off mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted. Her hands shook as she turned to the last entry. It was from a woman named Evelyn, dated 15 years ago. "The shadow grows stronger. It knows I'm afraid. But I found something, a way to stop it. It's risky, but it's the only chance I have. If anyone reads this, know that it thrives on isolation. Find someone. Don't face it alone." Madison's heart raced. Evelyn's words felt like both a warning and a plea. She picked up her phone and dialed Daniel's number. It rang twice before he answered. "Madison," his voice was tense. "I need your help," she said, her voice barely steady. "I can't do this alone." There was a pause, then a sigh. "I'll be right there." Minutes later, Daniel arrived with a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He stepped inside and locked the door behind him. "We don't have much time," he said, pulling out a bundle of candles, a notebook, and a strange, metallic charm. "If Evelyn's notes are right, we need to draw it out and confront it together." Madison swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" "It means we're going to call it," Daniel said. lighting the candles and placing them in a circle around the room. "And we're going to end this." As the candles burned, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, converging toward the corner. The whispers began, low and menacing, growing louder with each passing moment. Madison clung to Daniel's arm as the temperature in the room plummeted. "Stay strong," Daniel said, his voice firm. He held up the metallic charm, its surface etched with strange symbols. "It's trying to scare us. Don't let it." The shadows writhed, coalescing into the tall, faceless figure Madison had seen before. It stepped out of the corner, its presence suffocating. The whispers became a roar, filling her ears with unintelligible words. Daniel began to chant, the words from Evelyn's journal spilling from his lips. The charm glowed faintly, and the figure hesitated, as if unsure. Madison found her voice and joined in, her words shaky but growing stronger with each repetition. The figure let out a piercing scream, its form flickering like a dying flame. The shadows began to recede, drawn back into the corner until the room was still once more. The candles flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Madison's breathing was ragged as she fumbled for the flashlight. When she turned it on, the corner was empty. The oppressive weight was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel nodded, though his expression was grim. "For now. But we've weakened it. As long as we don't let it regain its strength, it won't come back." Madison collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion washing over her. The shadow was gone, but the memory of its presence lingered. She glanced at Daniel, grateful for his help. Together, they had faced the darkness, and together, they had survived. The first thing Mark noticed was the silence and oppressive, suffocating quiet that pressed against his ears like a physical weight. He sat up, his hands brushing against the cold, smooth surface beneath him. It felt like polished stone. His head throbbed, and his thoughts were a jumble of confusion. Where was he? How did he get here? The room was pitch black. He could see nothing, not even the outlines of walls or furniture. Panic began to creep in as he groped around, searching for anything familiar. His fingers touched the ground, feeling its icy texture. It was seamless, as if the room were carved from a single massive block of stone. "Hello," he called out, his voice breaking the silence. It sounded hollow, swallowed up by the darkness. No echo, no response. Mark fumbled in his pockets for his phone, praying for its comforting glow. His fingers closed around the device, and he quickly unlocked it. The faint light of the screen illuminated his surroundings. He was in a small, windowless room with smooth, featureless walls. No door, no vents, nothing to suggest a way in or out. The air was cold and still, carrying a faint metallic scent that made his stomach churn. He shone the phone's flashlight around, hoping to find some clue, some explanation. That's when he saw it. A shadow, darker than the surrounding blackness, moved across the far wall. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Mark froze, his breath caught in his throat. The shadow didn't belong to him. It was too tall, too distorted. It seemed to ripple, like smoke caught in a draft. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. The shadow didn't respond. Instead, it moved again, sliding along the wall before disappearing into the corner. Mark's heart pounded as he pointed the light toward the corner, but there was nothing there, just blank, featureless stone. He stood, his legs shaky, and approached the corner cautiously. His phone's beam quivered as his hand shook. When he reached out to touch the wall, it was cold and solid, just like the rest of the room. Suddenly, the light flickered. The phone screen dimmed, and the battery indicator flashed red. "No, no, no," Mark muttered, frantically tapping the screen. But the light went out, plunging him back into darkness. The silence returned, heavier than before. Then he heard it, a faint shuffling sound, like bare feet moving across the stone floor. It was coming from behind him. Mark whipped around, his eyes straining against the dark. "Who's there?" he shouted, trying to sound braver than he felt. His voice cracked, betraying his fear. The shuffling stopped. The silence stretched, long and unbearable. And then, a whisper, "Why are you here?" The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it sent chills racing down Mark's spine. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, He turned in circles, trying to pinpoint its source. "I don't know," he shouted. "I don't know how I got here. Please, just let me go." The voice chuckled, low and mirthless. "There is no way out." Mark's knees buckled, and he sank to the floor. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. This had to be a dream, a nightmare he would wake up from any moment. But the coldness of the floor, the ache in his head, the pounding of his heart, it all felt too real. The shuffling sound began again, circling him now. Mark squeezed his eyes shut, clutching his phone like a lifeline. He whispered to himself, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But the voice spoke again, closer this time. "Oh, it's very real." Mark opened his eyes, and for the briefest moment, he saw it. A figure, tall and shadowy, looming over him. Its face was featureless, its form shifting and indistinct. And then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness once more. The silence returned, deeper than before, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Mark's chest heaved as he fought to steady his breathing. He didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. He wasn't alone in the room. And the shadows were watching. Mark sat in the darkness, clutching his dead phone, as if it could somehow shield him from the terror surrounding him. His mind raced, searching for answers, but none came. The voice, the shadow, the impossible room, it was like he had been plucked from reality and thrown into a waking nightmare. Hours seemed to pass, though he couldn't be sure. Time had lost all meaning in the endless black. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint sound of his breathing and the occasional shuffle that made his skin crawl. He tried to keep his thoughts rational, to push down the fear threatening to overwhelm him. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw it, the tall, shifting figure, faceless and watching. Then, out of the quiet, came a new sound. A faint tapping, rhythmic and deliberate. It seemed to come from the wall directly opposite him. Mark's heart leapt. Could it be someone else? Another person trapped like him? "Hello," he called, his voice hoarse. He scrambled toward the sound, his hands outstretched to feel the wall. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural groan that sent chills racing down his spine. "Who's there?" he demanded, though his voice betrayed his fear. The groan grew louder, a horrible, unnatural noise that seemed to vibrate through the very air. Mark backed away, his pulse pounding in his ears. Then the voice returned, a soft whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You shouldn't have come here." "I didn't mean to," Mark shouted. "I don't even know where I am. Just tell me how to get out of here." The whisper turned into laughter, low and mocking. "There is no escape," it said. "This place is alive. It feeds on fear, on despair. You are exactly where you're meant to be." Mark's knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the cold floor. His breath came in ragged gasps as the weight of the words settled over him. Was this it? Was he doomed to stay here forever, a prisoner of the dark? Desperation clawed at him, and he forced himself to think. If the room wanted him to despair, then maybe that was its weakness. He had to fight it, to stay focused. He picked up his phone, even though it was useless, and stared at the blank screen as if willing it to light up. And then, to his astonishment, it did. The screen flickered to life, dim but functional. A single notification appeared. "Look behind you." Mark's blood ran cold. He didn't want to turn, but something compelled him. Slowly, he shifted his gaze over his shoulder, and there it was again, the shadow, taller now, more defined. Its form seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and though it had no face, Mark felt its gaze pierce through him. "Why are you doing this to me?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The shadow tilted its head, as if considering his question. Then it spoke, its voice a mixture of whispers and growls. "You don't belong here. But you opened the door. You let it in." "What door?" Mark demanded, panic rising. "I didn't open anything." The shadow's form began to ripple, its edges dissolving like smoke. "The door is within you," it said, "and now it will never close." With that, the shadow lunged toward him, engulfing him in darkness. Mark screamed, the sound tearing through the silence. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was gone. The room was still again, but something had changed. The air felt heavier, the shadows deeper. And in the distance, faint but unmistakable, he heard a new sound, footsteps, approaching slowly. Mark clutched his phone, its screen now blank once more, and braced himself. He wasn't ready for what came next. The footsteps drew closer, each step echoing like a drumbeat in Mark's ears. He pressed himself against the wall, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The room, the darkness, the shadows they had him cornered. From the gloom emerged a figure, not the shifting shadow from before, but something more solid, more human. A man, or at least something resembling one, stepped into the faint glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere. His face was pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into Mark's soul. "Who are you?" Mark managed to whisper. The figure tilted its head, a ghost of a smile playing on its lips. "I am the caretaker," it said, its voice calm and cold. "I ensure the room's purpose is fulfilled." "What purpose?" Mark demanded, anger flickering through his fear. "Why am I here?" The caretaker stepped closer, and Mark pressed harder against the wall. "You stumbled into the room, as all others have," it said. "It is not a place you find. It finds you. And now, you must make a choice." "What choice?" Mark's voice cracked. The caretaker extended a hand, bony and pale. In its palm lay a small, black object that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was shaped like a key, but its edges were jagged, and its surface shimmered with an otherworldly glow. "Take it," the caretaker said. "With this you may leave. But know this, the door it opens leads not to freedom, but to another's despair. To escape, you must condemn another to take your place." Mark stared at the key, his heart pounding. "I can't do that," he said, shaking his head. "I won't." The caretaker's smile widened, a grotesque stretch of its lips. "Then remain here, and become part of the room. The choice is yours." Mark's mind raced. Could he do it? Could he sacrifice a stranger for his own freedom? He thought of the shadow, the whispers, the suffocating darkness. Could he endure this forever? The footsteps began again, echoing from the dark corners of the room. Mark realized he wasn't alone. The shadows shifted, forming figures, dozens of them, all watching, all waiting. They had made their choices. Now it was his turn. With trembling hands, he reached for the key. It was cold, unnaturally so, and as his fingers closed around it, the caretaker stepped back, dissolving into the darkness. The room seemed to shudder, the walls rippling like water. A door appeared, a jagged outline carved into the stone. Mark approached it, his legs weak, his heart heavy. He placed the key into the lock, and as it turned, he heard the whisper. The old-fashioned rotary phone sat on the small wooden table in the corner of Emma's modest living room. Its presence was almost decorative, a relic from a bygone era that rarely served its intended purpose. Emma, a young woman in her late 20s, had kept it as a nostalgic reminder of her late grandmother, who had once used it daily. The first ring came at precisely 12:03 a.m. Emma, half asleep on her couch with a book draped over her lap, jolted awake. The shrill sound cut through the silence of her small suburban home like a knife. She blinked groggy, glancing at the clock on the wall. Midnight calls were rare. Her friends usually texted, and no one she knew would ever think to call her landline. With a hesitant hand, she picked up the receiver. "Hello." At first, there was nothing. Just static, faint and distant, like a whisper of wind through empty fields. She waited, her heart beginning to beat faster. "Hello," she repeated, more firmly this time. Then came the voice, low, calm, and unsettlingly close, as though the speaker were mere inches from her ear. "I'm outside your house." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She froze, clutching the receiver tightly, her eyes darting to the nearest window. The curtains were drawn, but the thought of someone standing on the other side of the glass made her stomach churn. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The line went dead. For a moment, she sat there, staring at the phone in her hand, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Finally, she placed it back on the cradle and stood, her legs trembling. She moved cautiously to the window, parting the curtain just enough to peek outside. The street was empty. The only light came from the flickering street lamp at the end of the road. No cars, no movement, just the quiet hum of the night. "Probably a prank," she muttered to herself, though her voice lacked conviction. Still, She double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows before heading to bed. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The second call came the next night. This time, Emma was prepared. She had her cell phone in one hand and a small kitchen knife in the other. The phone rang at 12:03 a.m., just as it had the night before. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the receiver. "Who is this?" The voice was the same, low, calm, and unnervingly close. "I'm outside your house." Her heart pounded, but this time she was ready. She set the landline down without hanging up and dialed 911 on her cell phone. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone outside my house, Emma whispered, glancing toward the window. Are you able to see them? The operator asked. No, Emma admitted, but they called me. They said. Her voice caught in her throat as she heard something from the landline still off the hook. Breathing, deep, deliberate, and steady. The operator's voice faded into the background as Emma's attention fixated on the sound. She reached for the receiver with trembling hands. Hello, she whispered. The breathing stopped. Then, after a long pause, the voice returned. Why did you call them, Emma? She dropped the phone, her pulse roaring in her ears. How did they know her name? When the police arrived, they found no one outside. The officers reassured her it was likely a prank and offered to patrol the area for the next few nights. Emma thanked them, though her unease lingered long after they had left. She sat awake in her living room until dawn, clutching the knife and staring at the phone, dreading the next midnight ring. Emma spent the next day in a fog of exhaustion, jumping at every sound and glancing over her shoulder as if the voice might somehow materialize behind her. By nightfall, her anxiety had only grown. She fortified her home like a fortress, double-checking locks, closing blinds, and even dragging a heavy armchair to block the front door. When the clock struck midnight, Emma stared at the rotary phone, its silent presence mocking her. At 12:03 a.m., as she knew it would, the phone rang. She didn't answer immediately this time. Instead, she let it ring, each shrill tone cutting deeper into her nerves. After the fourth ring, she grabbed the receiver. What do you want? She demanded, her voice trembling with anger and fear. There was no static this time, no deep breaths. Just silence. Then, the voice, calm as ever. Why are you so scared, Emma? I'm only outside your house. Her stomach twisted. Who are you? What do you want from me? The voice chuckled, a low, cold sound that sent shivers down her spine. You'll see soon enough. Emma slammed the phone down, her chest heaving as she tried to steady her breathing. She forced herself to move, grabbing her cell phone to call the police again. Before she could dial, her cell phone buzzed in her hand. It was a text message from an unknown number. Why did you hang up? Her fingers fumbled as she dropped the phone in shock. She backed away, staring at it as if it might come alive. Her mind raced. How had they gotten her cell phone number? A loud bang echoed from the back door, and Emma froze. Someone was outside. Knife in hand, Emma crept toward the back door, her heart hammering so loudly she thought it might give her away. The house was eerily quiet, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the oppressive silence. She reached the door and stood motionless, listening. Another bang, softer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of something scraping against the wood. Gathering her courage, Emma leaned toward the peephole. At first, she saw nothing but darkness. Then, slowly, a pale face appeared, inches from the glass. It wasn't human. The eyes were hollow, black pits, and the mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Emma stumbled back, choking on a scream. She dropped the knife and ran to the living room, grabbing her cell phone to dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's something at my back door, she gasped, her voice shaking. Stay on the line, Mom, the operator said. Officers are on their way. Are you in a safe location? Emma didn't answer. The banging had stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. She strained to hear anything, her entire body trembling. Then came the voice, no longer confined to the phone. Emma, it whispered, impossibly close. I'm inside your house. The line went dead, and Emma's knees buckled. She clung to the couch, her mind racing. Could it be in the house? She hadn't heard the door open, hadn't seen anyone come in. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow, deliberate, and heavy. Emma bolted for the stairs, her fear driving her faster than she thought possible. She slammed the bedroom door shut behind her and locked it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. "Emma," the voice called, now lower, raspier, and more inhuman. "Why are you hiding? Don't you want to meet me?" Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her back against the door, clutching the cell phone like a lifeline. The doorknob rattled, then still ... "You can't hide forever," the voice said, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. Emma stayed there until the police arrived, trembling and staring at the door. When the officers searched the house, they found no one, no signs of forced entry, no footprints. But as one officer escorted her out, he noticed something on the back door, a long, deep scratch, as though made by claws. Emma couldn't sleep for the third night in a row. She sat in her living room, every light in the house blazing, clutching her cell phone in one hand and the police-issued panic button in the other. The officers who had investigated her home assured her it was safe, but their skepticism had been evident. To them, she was just another paranoid woman spooked by her own imagination. But Emma knew better. She'd seen the face at the back door, heard the voice inside her house. Whatever was tormenting her wasn't ordinary, and it wasn't finished. At 12:03 a.m., the phone rang. Her stomach clenched, and she hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello." The voice was different this time, calmer, softer, almost soothing. "Emma," it said, "why do you fight so hard? Don't you see, this ends tonight?" "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "Why are you doing this to me?" The line crackled faintly. "I was invited. You called for me." "Don't you remember?" Emma froze. "I never called anyone. I don't even know who or what you are." A low, mocking chuckle came through the receiver. "Don't lie to yourself. You opened the door the moment you picked up the phone. Now, it's time to let me in." The line went dead. The house fell eerily silent. Emma's breath quickened as she glanced around, her senses heightened to every creak and groan of the old building. Then she heard a faint tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the front door. Her hands trembled as she approached, the panic button gripped tightly. "The police are on their way," she shouted, her voice cracking. The tapping stopped. She hesitated, then peered through the peephole. The street outside was empty, bathed in the pale glow of a flickering streetlight. Emma turned away, her heart pounding, when the tapping started again, this time from the living room window. She spun around, staring at the heavy curtains. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, until it sounded like nails clawing at the glass. "Stop it," she screamed. As if obeying her, the noise ceased. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then the voice returned, whispering from somewhere deep within the house. "You can't run, Emma. You let me in, and now I'm here to stay." Emma's panic button slipped from her hands as the lights in the house began to flicker. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach for her. She bolted up the stairs, her mind racing. She needed a plan, an escape, but where could she go? Whatever this was, it wasn't bound by locks or walls. Reaching the attic, she pulled down the ladder and climbed into the cramped, dusty space. She slammed the hatch shut behind her, barricading it with an old trunk. The silence returned, thick and oppressive. Emma's breath caught when she noticed a small object lying in the middle of the attic floor. It was a rotary phone identical to the one in her living room. It began to ring. Her instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere left to go. With trembling hands, Emma picked up the receiver. "Hello? Did you really think you could hide from me?" the voice asked, cold and mocking. Emma's tears flowed freely now. "Why me? What do you want from me?" The voice softened, almost sympathetic. "You've been so lonely, Emma. You called out for someone to fill the silence," I answered. Her heart sank as fragments of memory surfaced, nights spent wishing for an end to her isolation, her whispers to the void, begging for a sign that she wasn't alone. "I didn't mean," she began, but the voice cut her off. "Intent doesn't matter. You invited me, and now I'm here, forever. The shadows in the attic began to shift, coalescing into a form tall, featureless, and impossibly dark. Emma dropped the phone and backed into the corner, her voice breaking into sobs. Please, she begged, leave me alone. The figure stepped closer, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. There's no going back, Emma, but I can offer you one mercy. The shadows surged forward, enveloping her completely. The next morning, Emma's house was quiet. The rotary phone sat on the living room table, its receiver slightly off the hook. A real estate agent arrived later that day to show the property, puzzled by the tenant's sudden disappearance. But as they walked through the house, the agent thought they heard faint whispers coming from the attic. When they glanced at the rotary phone, the receiver lifted itself, as if answering a call that only it could hear. The line crackled softly, then went silent. The Crescent Moon Hotel had been abandoned for decades, standing as a decaying monument to a forgotten era. Nestled on the outskirts of town, it was a place of eerie silence and long shadows, avoided by locals and shunned by even the most adventurous urban explorers. The stories surrounding it were too chilling: unexplained noises, fleeting shadows, and most famously, the sound of a child's cry echoing through its empty halls. For Marissa, the hotel was an opportunity. A budding paranormal investigator, she had built a small online following documenting haunted locations. The Crescent Moon Hotel was a challenge she couldn't resist. Armed with her camera, recorder, and flashlight, she crossed the creaking threshold into the hotel one overcast evening, determined to capture evidence of the unexplained. The lobby was vast, its grandeur faded but still palpable. Dust-coated chandeliers hung precariously from the ceiling, and the once luxurious carpet was now a moth-eaten shadow of its former self. Marissa's footsteps echoed as she moved across the marble floor, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. She set up her equipment, placing motion sensors and voice recorders in strategic locations. Her flashlight cast long beams of light, illuminating peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. Despite the oppressive quiet, Marissa felt a prickling on the back of her neck, as if unseen eyes were watching her every move. Hours passed with little activity. Marissa documented the building's state, speaking into her camera about the legends surrounding it. She was beginning to doubt she would find anything when she heard it, a faint, distant sound that made her blood run cold. It was the cry of a child. Marissa froze, her heart pounding. The sound was soft, almost plaintive, echoing through the empty halls. She grabbed her recorder and flashlight, following the noise. It seemed to come from upstairs, drawing her deeper into the darkness. The staircase groaned under her weight as she ascended, the sound growing louder with each step. By the time she reached the second floor, the crying had become more distinct. It wasn't just a single sob but a heartbreaking wail, as if the child was lost and desperate. "Hello," Marissa called out, her voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Marissa shone her flashlight down the hallway, its beam cutting through the gloom. The corridor was lined with rooms, their doors ajar, revealing glimpses of decayed furniture and graffiti-covered walls. She moved cautiously, her recorder capturing every sound. As she approached one of the rooms, the crying resumed, this time directly ahead of her. Marissa hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to turn back, but she pressed on. The room's door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a nursery-like space. A broken crib sat in the corner, its once bright paint faded and peeling. A single, dust-covered toy rested on the floor, a teddy bear with one missing eye. The crying stopped again, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press down on her. Marissa stepped into the room, her flashlight sweeping across the walls. She felt a sudden chill, the temperature dropping noticeably. Her breath misted in the air, and her flashlight flickered. Before she could react, a whisper brushed past her ear. "Why are you here?" Marissa spun around, her flashlight wildly illuminating the room. It was empty, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. She clutched her recorder, her voice shaking as she spoke into it. "I'm here to understand, to find out who you are." The room seemed to groan in response, the walls vibrating slightly. The crying began again, this time louder and more anguished. Morris's eyes were drawn to the teddy bear. It was now sitting upright, its single button eye fixed on her. Fear surged through her, but she forced herself to stay. She reached for the bear, her fingers brushing its dusty fur. A sudden wave of emotion hit her, sorrow, fear, and a deep, overwhelming loneliness. Tears streamed down her face unbidden, as if the feelings weren't her own. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice cracking. The crying stopped, and for a moment, the silence was absolute. Then, the recorder in her hand crackled to life, playing back a voice that was not her own. "I'm lost." The voice was that of a child, fragile and trembling. Morris's heart ached at the sound, but before she could respond, the door slammed shut behind her. The flashlight flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. The crying returned, louder and more distorted, as if it were coming from all around her. Marissa fumbled with her flashlight, her breaths coming in short gasps. When the light finally flickered back on, the room was empty. The teddy bear was gone. She bolted from the room, her footsteps echoing as she ran down the hall and back to the staircase. But the crying followed her, relentless and haunting. As she reached the lobby, the sound stopped abruptly, leaving her in suffocating silence once more. Marissa staggered outside, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the hotel. She looked back at the dark silhouette of the Crescent Moon Hotel, its windows like empty eyes watching her leave. She knew she couldn't stay away. The child's voice, fragile and desperate, was etched into her mind. Whatever was inside the hotel, it wasn't just a story. It was real and it needed her help. Marissa couldn't sleep that night. The child's fragile voice echoed in her mind, the words "I'm lost" replaying like a haunting melody. She sat at her desk, reviewing the footage and audio recordings she had captured. The crying, the whispers, and the chilling reply were all there, undeniable proof of something extraordinary within the Crescent Moon Hotel. But it wasn't just evidence to Marissa. The sorrow in the child's voice stirred something deeper, a need to understand, to help. The next evening, armed with more equipment and a determination to uncover the truth, she returned to the hotel. The sun dipped below the horizon as she crossed the threshold, plunging the decaying building into shadow. The air inside felt heavier this time, charged with an unseen presence. Marissa followed her instincts, climbing the creaking staircase to the second floor. The hall was just as she remembered, its doors ajar and revealing glimpses of decay. But tonight, the oppressive silence was broken by faint footsteps echoing from the far end of the corridor. "Hello," she called, her voice steady but soft. The footsteps stopped, and the crying began again, faint and distant. It led her to another room, this one larger and more elaborate than the nursery she had found before. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper depicting playful scenes of children, their cheerful imagery now twisted by time and decay. In the center of the room stood a small table, its surface covered with dusty toys. A porcelain doll with cracked features and a missing eye seemed to watch her as she stepped inside. The crying grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Marissa froze, the air turned icy, and her breath misted before her. Then, from behind, she heard the faint rustle of movement. She spun around, flashlight in hand, but the doorway was empty. The hall beyond stretched into darkness, silent once more. "I'm here to help," she said aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "Can you show me where you are?" The room responded with a low creak, and the doll on the table toppled over as if pushed by unseen hands. Marissa's camera captured the moment, its red recording light blinking steadily. She knelt to pick up the doll, and as her fingers brushed its surface, another wave of emotion washed over her, fear, desperation, and an overwhelming sense of abandonment. The whispers returned, faint but distinct. This time, they were closer, surrounding her. Words began to form. "Help me find it." "Find what?" Marissa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The room's temperature plummeted further, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and writhe. Her flashlight flickered, casting distorted shapes on the walls. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became an almost deafening cacophony, and then, just as suddenly, they stopped. A single, clear voice broke the silence. "The basement." Marissa's stomach tightened. She had avoided the basement on her first visit. It was notoriously unsafe, its stairs rotted and unstable. But now, it seemed to be the key to whatever was happening here. Gathering her courage, she made her way back down the staircase to the ground floor. The door to the basement was at the end of a narrow hallway, partially obscured by debris. It took effort to clear the path and force the door open. A damp, musty smell wafted out, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. The staircase leading down was as treacherous as she had feared, the wood groaning under her weight. She descended carefully, her flashlight barely penetrating the thick darkness below. The basement was expansive, its walls lined with old shelves and forgotten relics of the hotel's past. The air was colder here, the silence oppressive. Marissa's flashlight illuminated a small, child-sized chair in the center of the room. It was out of place, clean and free of dust, as if someone had placed it there recently. On the seat lay a photograph, its edges yellowed with age. She picked it up, her hands trembling. The image was of a young boy, no older than 6, standing in front of the Crescent Moon Hotel. His expression was somber, his eyes hauntingly familiar. Scrawled on the back of the photo in shaky handwriting were the words, "Find the keepsake, set me free." Marissa's heart raced as the crying began again, louder and more desperate than before. It echoed off the basement walls, surrounding her. She turned, her flashlight catching glimpses of movement in the shadows. Something was here with her, something that didn't want her to leave. Clutching the photograph, she whispered, "I'll help you, I promise." The crying ceased, replaced by a single, soft whisper that sent chills down her spine. "Hurry." The photograph stayed in Marissa's trembling hands as she ascended the basement stairs, her mind racing. The boy in the image was the key to the mystery, and the keepsake mentioned on the back was her only clue. But what could it be, and why was the child still bound to the Crescent Moon Hotel? The crying had ceased as she emerged back into the decaying halls, but the oppressive atmosphere remained. The hotel felt alive, its walls breathing with unseen energy. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, and every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Still, Marissa pressed on. The photograph stayed in Marissa's trembling hands as she ascended the basement stairs, her mind racing. The boy in the image was the key to the mystery, and the keepsake mentioned on the back was her only clue. But what could it be, and why was the child still bound to the Crescent Moon Hotel? The crying had ceased as she emerged back into the decaying halls, but the oppressive atmosphere remained. The hotel felt alive, its walls breathing with unseen energy. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, and every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Still, Marissa pressed on. She returned to the nursery where she had first encountered the teddy bear. The room seemed different now, colder and darker, as if it had been waiting for her. She searched the space meticulously, checking every corner and turning over every piece of furniture. Finally, she noticed something she had missed before, a loose floorboard beneath the crib. Her fingers pried at the edges until the board came free. Beneath it was a small, rusted tin box. Inside lay a delicate locket on a tarnished chain. The locket was engraved with the initials TL, and when Marissa opened it, she found a tiny photograph of the same boy from the larger picture, smiling faintly. This was the keepsake. A sudden chill swept through the room, and the door slammed shut behind her. The crying began again, louder and more anguished than ever. Marissa clutched the locket tightly, her breath coming in short gasps. The shadows in the room began to coalesce, forming the faint outline of a child. "Is this yours?" Marissa asked, her voice trembling, as she held out the locket. The figure didn't respond, but the crying softened into a quiet whimper. Marissa took this as a sign and placed the locket on the crib, stepping back cautiously. The shadow moved toward it, reaching out with translucent hands. As the locket touched the shadow's form, a soft light began to emanate from it, filling the room with a warm glow. The child's voice, clear and sorrowful, echoed around her. "Thank you, but it's not enough. You must know the truth." Before Marissa could react, the room around her dissolved into darkness. She found herself standing in a vivid memory, the hotel restored to its former glory. The lobby bustled with life, guests laughing, bellhops carrying luggage, and a boy sitting on the grand staircase clutching the very same teddy bear. Marissa recognized him immediately. This was the boy from the photograph. But his smile was fleeting, replaced by a look of fear as a man his father, she assumed stormed toward him, shouting angrily. The scene shifted, fast-forwarding through moments of the boy's life. Nights spent crying in the nursery, being locked in the basement as punishment, and finally, a tragic accident on the stairs that left him lifeless. The memory faded, leaving Marissa back in the present, tears streaming down her face. She understood now. The boy had been neglected and tormented, his spirit trapped in the hotel by the pain and fear he had endured. The keepsake wasn't just a memento, it was a symbol of the love he had never fully known. The shadows in the room began to recede, and the child's figure appeared again, more defined and peaceful this time. "You saw me," he said softly. "You know me." Marissa nodded, her voice breaking. "You don't have to stay here anymore. You can let go." The boy smiled faintly, a light surrounding him, as he began to fade. The crying ceased, replaced by a profound silence that felt almost comforting. The locket, now glowing softly, rested on the crib, its job complete. As Marissa left the nursery, the oppressive weight of the hotel lifted. The air felt lighter, the shadows no longer threatening. She stepped outside into the cool night, the Crescent Moon Hotel standing silently behind her. The locket remained in her pocket as she walked away, a reminder of the boy who had finally found peace. Marissa knew she would never forget him or the lesson he had taught her. Even the smallest gestures of compassion could break the chains of the past.
If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Mystical Tales, so you won't miss out on more eerie and thrilling tales in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.